I take this, what is happening in my country now, extremely seriously. Both sides of my family, I've said this before, just one generation back, my grandparents on both sides of my family came from Ireland and Italy to escape political repression and starvation and Christian tortures in social life. In Ireland, women couldn't goddamn do a thing because the Catholic Church had cast them into the role of, the evil bringers of death, according to Genesis, right? I can remember having discussions. I never knew my paternal grandparents, but I had discussions with my maternal grandparents about what life was like in Italy at the very beginning of the 20th century, and it was pretty fucking horrible. So, and I have paid attention to old Jewish people that I know here in Atlanta, and that I knew in Florida, and that I knew in Savannah, and that I knew in Richmond and Raleigh and every goddamn city I have lived in for the past 70 years. 60 years. I paid attention. I listened to these old Jews tell me how their lives, their families, their culture, them were absolutely destroyed, except for the survivors, by Nazism, by fascism. How they were scapegoated, just like scapegoating is going on in this country now. Only it's not Jews. Right now, it's immigrants. But that's going to change. It's also universities now are in the crosshairs of this corrupt, filthy, goddamn toilet rat administration. And so many of these universities are cooperating with this bastard Donald Trump. They're giving in to what this son of a bitch is saying. Trump hates education. He hates art. He hates music. He is a fucking fascist to the bottom of his feet. And the only thing he's interested in is absolute power. To what end? This dumb fuck doesn't even know to what end. He doesn't know how to use power. Look at this debacle with the attack on Yemen. And now we're starting to see elite universities and faculty, elite universities collapsing, just saying, okay, Mr. God, Christ, Jesus, damn benefactor of all things living, yes, we will do what you say. Because we know if we don't, you'll punish us, you'll spank us, you'll withhold grant money, you'll do something that we don't like. We can't stand. So as far as academic freedom is concerned, fuck it. We'll go with you, Honorable dear God Jesus Christ Trump. Universities are saying this. Faculties are starting to react. A Yale professor who studies fascism is leaving the United States to work at a Canadian university because of the current political situation here. This is a professor who studies fascism. And he has stated categorically that he worries that the United States is now right on the cusp of becoming, quote, a fascist dictatorship, end quote. Now, I wasn't around in the 30s in Germany, neither were you, but I wonder if the German people, if the academics, if the business leaders, whoever the movers and shakers were in Germany in the 30s, if they were aware of what was going on. And I maintain that they were, but they decided, Herr Hitler is just, trying to save us from the Depression and from the humiliation of the end of World War I. Well, not World War I, but from the end of the Great War. The Yale professor is Jason Stanley. And he wrote a book about 6 or 7 years ago entitled How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. And he had a chat with the Guardian newspaper. He said he has accepted a position at the University of Toronto. And he told a philosophy profession website earlier this week, I think, that he made that decision, quote, in order to raise my kids in a country that is not tilting toward a fascist dictatorship, end quote. This from a man who studies fascism, writes about it, and sees what he sees. Now, going back to Germany in the 30s, there were people then who saw what was happening. Call that group the Jewish intelligentsia, if you will. But there were numbers of Jews who saw what was happening and tried to warn anybody who would listen, which usually meant other Jews, because even then, before the Holocaust, before the fucking horror, Jews were a group that was constantly belittled, attacked, denied. But they were also part of the lifeblood of Germany. So when they saw what was happening, so many of them, I mentioned this yesterday, they took their families, sent the families away first, packed up, and got the hell out of what was going to become an abattoir for Jewish citizens, a fucking slaughterhouse. So what about here now? Oh, Malloy, come on. What the fuck? Mike, come on. We like to listen to you, but you're going a little bit too far here this morning or this evening, dude. I don't think so. Professor Stanley said in an interview that Columbia University's recent collapse to the administration of the sewer rat, he said those actions by Columbia University moved him to accept the offer from the Canadian university. And last Friday, if you remember, Columbia University collapsed, gave in to the Trump administration by agreeing to a series of demands on Columbia? Demands from a fucked up, useless, goddamn politician who's hell-bent on establishing fascism, destroying the Constitution of the United States, an evil fuck like Donald Trump, and Columbia gives in to him. They agreed to a series of demands because they wanted to restore the $400 million in federal funding. That's the publicized reason. I wonder what the real fucking reason is beside that. $400 million to the alumni of Columbia University? That would be an afternoon's fundraising. Are you serious? But the changes that Columbia University agreed to include crackdowns on protests, increased security, internal reviews of some academic programs, like, the Middle Eastern Studies program, the hiring of a number of New York City cops to have the authority and the power to go on the campus grounds and arrest people for protesting, not for committing crimes, but for exercising their First Amendment right. Does this not just bang your fucking head like a drum? Instead of reading this, I felt like somebody was beating the shit out of the top of my head. Like, wake up, Malloy. This is happening in your country. Professor Stanley said, quote, when I saw Columbia completely capitulate, and I saw this vocabulary of, well, we're going to work behind the scenes because we're not going to be targeted. That whole way of thinking presupposes that some universities will get targeted, and you don't want to be one of those universities, and that is a losing strategy, end quote. Professor Stanley added this, quote, "You've got to just band together and say an attack on one university is an attack on all universities, and maybe you lose that fight, but you're certainly going to lose this one if you give up before the fight. Columbia was just such a warning," he added. "I just became very worried because I didn't see a strong enough reaction in other universities to side with Columbia. I see Yale trying not to be a target. And as I said, that is a losing strategy," end quote. I just find what is happening, truth seekers, to be unacceptable. I mean, seriously, unacceptable. And I don't know what, where it concerns me, your humble and obedient servant here. I don't know what course of action I will choose to follow. I really don't, not at this point. I have, I've spent my whole, not all, but the vast majority of my adult life here in the South, here in Atlanta, or Tampa, or Savannah, or Richmond, or Raleigh, or Charleston, always in the South, always in the South. And I have developed friendships, professional relations, and I've watched some of those dissolve. I've watched people die. I've watched people get old and disappear. So at this stage in my life, I'm just talking, this is just me talking. At this stage in my life, I don't know how I'm going to react to this. But I see what's happening in this country as an absolute threat to everything that we have tried to be in this country for the past 250 years. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. The Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.